Hi, I'm Brett Johnson, former United States most wanted cyber criminal, now good guy, or as the United States Secret Service called me, the original internet godfather. Now, how did I get that title? Well, 39 felonies because, well, why not? I was placed on the United States most wanted list. I escaped from prison, had a pretty fun time doing that, and I built and ran the first organized cybercrime community. It was called Shadow Crew. It was a precursor of today's darknet and darknet markets. It laid the foundation for the way modern cybercrime channels operate today. Those 39 felonies, well, you want to point your finger at somebody responsible for a lot of cybercrime, point it this way. Needless to say, that shit gets you sent to prison. Now, look, there's a whole story behind all that. We ain't got time for that today. Because today, right now, it's time for an episode of The Brett Johnson Show. Today's episode, all about synthetic fraud. All right, stop just a second. Turns out today's episode is not about synthetic fraud. It turns out today's episode is about Ross Ulbricht. I was going to just comment a few minutes about Ross in the case, give my opinion on that. Turns out I ended up recording over 40-some minutes, so it's a standalone episode. The next episode will be synthetic fraud. Today, though, our episode we're going to title Comments About Ross Ulbricht when we come back. First thing out of the gate, you will notice I finally got me that Ohio State hat. I had a listener, a viewer, one of my subscribers on YouTube, whatever you want to call this gentleman, he had mentioned more than once, get yourself an Ohio State hat. So I have. Go Buckeyes. See, I'm from Kentucky. We don't even know what a football is in Kentucky. They sent us a load of them. We tried to shoot basketball hoops with them. Couldn't do it. We don't know what that shit is. We know basketball. So I don't mind putting on the Ohio State hat because I don't think Ohio knows a damn thing about basketball. Now, this show ain't about sports, so we're going to move right along. All right. So, hey, as you'll notice, today's episode is a day late. My apologies for that. My dad last Friday, he got hospitalized. I'm in Birmingham, Alabama. He's down in Panama City, Florida. I think some of the listeners know that my stepmother passed away a few months ago. As such, my dad has absolutely no one down there to look after him. I'm looking at bringing him up to Birmingham so that we can take care of him here. But the man took a fall, as you sometimes are wont to do when you're a senior citizen. So he took a fall, and he has this thing called rhabdomyolysis. And what that is that's the muscle fibers breaking down, entering the bloodstream, causes really bad arrhythmia, increased calcium levels, potassium is all screwed up, things like that, and you can potentially die. So he takes this fall. He's laying in the floor. He can't, he doesn't have the little, help me out falling, I can't get up necklace. He doesn't have that. He couldn't crawl to get his cell phone. So he lays in the floor for about 2 hours until, and during this 2 hour point of time is when this rhabdomyolysis kicks in. So, and it gets you to the point where you can't really move anything at all. I mean, your muscles completely break down. So he laid there, and if he had continued laying there, the man would have died, without a doubt. He would have died. But very fortunate, a 15-year-old kid in the neighborhood just happened to be walking in the neighborhood, passed by my dad's house, sees the garage door is open. Not only that, but the hatchback on his vehicle is up, realizes that that's not common for Mr. Johnson. So he goes and knocks on the door. My dad yells at him. This kid ends up having to break in the home, goes and gets his parents after that. They call an ambulance, take the man out. So I've been dealing with my dad and making sure the man's all right. I'm bouncing back and forth between Birmingham and Panama City, Florida, every other day almost. Yesterday, I actually had to fly into Pittsburgh to host an ACFE conference. So I did that. Then I flew directly back home. Today's Tuesday and recording this episode. So apologies about it being late. Please forgive me. Now, moving right along. On Twitter, I got access to all the Googles and all the Twitters. On Twitter, there was a gentleman who made a comment about Ross Ulbricht, because I have said in the past that Ross Ulbricht, he tried to have 5-6 people murdered. Well, some people have taken exception to that. And this gentleman, he he commented on that, and we did not have an argument per se. We just had a very friendly discussion, both in direct messages and on Twitter, that discussed that. And I told the guy, hey, I'll be more than happy on the next show to talk a bit about Ross Ulbricht. So that being said, Ross Ulbricht started Silk Road One. All right. So if you look at the way cybercrime operates, there are very few things that change the dynamic, that have a major dynamic shift in the way cybercrime and cyber criminals operate. Okay. So before the first really big shift is what I ended up doing. So before, there are three websites. There's Counterfeit Library, Shadow Crew, and then Carter Planet. All right. So Counterfeit Library and Shadow Crew, before those two sites specifically come into play, and I ran both of those, before those two sites come into play, the only avenue, you had to commit some sort of organized online crime, and understand that all online crime is organized. It is never a single attacker which seeks to attack you and victimize either you or your organization. It's always a group effort. So before Counterfeit Library and Shadow Crew, the only real avenue you had to engage in some sort of organized online crime was IRC, Internet Relay Chat, this rolling chat board where you had no idea who you were talking to, if you could trust that individual, if you could learn from that individual, if they knew what they were talking about, if they had a product or service, if they had it, if it worked, or if they were just going to rip you off because everyone in the channel was a crook. Shadow Crew specifically solves that problem. It gives a trust mechanism that criminals can use. Now, because of Shadow Crew, you had a large communication channel in the form of a forum type structure where individuals from different time zones could reference conversations days, weeks, months old. They could ask questions. They could learn from those conversations. They knew by looking at someone's screen name what the skill level of that person was. You see, on the dark web, what your screen name becomes your brand, and it translates or transfers pretty easily over to different forums and marketplaces as well. So you knew by looking at someone's screen name what the skill level of that person was. If you could trust that person, learn from that person, network with that person. We had vouching systems in place, review systems in place, escrow systems in place, all with the singular purpose of establishing trust with one criminal and another when they would never meet, never know each other's real name, and never know what each other look like. So that's what Shadow Crew does, among other things. Shadow Crew is also the forerunner of today's darknet marketplaces because of the types of products and services it sold and the members in that community, okay, that eBay type or Amazon type of marketplace. That's what Shadow Crew does, all right? That's really the first big shift. You've got Dmitry Golubov that comes in with his crew of Ukrainians. They start Carter Planet. That's the genesis of all modern credit card theft as we know it. So that's another big shift that comes in there, okay? Fast forward a few more years, and you've got two other huge shifts. You've got the advent of cryptocurrency. Cryptocurrency, specifically Bitcoin at that point in time, allowed criminals to buy and transfer money for illegal goods and services. It allowed them to somewhat anonymously launder money and move huge amounts of value from one wallet to another across international boundaries without really having much difficulty. All right. Back then, a lot of individuals thought that Bitcoin was anonymous. It took us, so let's be honest, sometimes criminals are slow learners. It took a while for people to realize that, hey, the Bitcoin blockchain, that shit's public. They're going to arrest you. And that's why you get the advent these days of more privacy-based tokens like Zcash, Monero, things like that. Okay, so crypto was one of these dynamic shifts in cybercrime because when I was running Shadow Crew, we didn't have that. We had eGold, we had Liberty Reserve, and it became very difficult sometimes to transfer funds from one criminal to another, either if you're buying products or services or you owe them a cut of whatever loot you've stolen or what have you. Well, crypto solves a lot of that problem, much to the chagrin of many investors, quote, or AKA gamblers these days who invest in crypto tokens and don't want to admit the illegal origins or use case of crypto tokens. Okay, so that's another shift. Another really big shift was the dark web, the Tor browser, because the Tor browser allows individuals to remain somewhat anonymous as long as they can use it properly, which becomes a huge caveat, because a lot of users don't know how to use it properly and they expose their real IP addresses. Okay. That's important because Ross Ulbricht is really the guy who really defines cryptocurrency at that time and redefines the way criminal marketplaces work. So he started this thing called Silk Road. All right. So crypto or Bitcoin today is going off at $29,000. It's down from a high of $70,000. Some people are saying it's going to crash down or go down to another 8K, which probably it'll pop back up from that. All right. More than likely it will. I mean, it's got a history of this shit. Anyway, Ross builds Silk Road, and the only payment instrument he allows on Silk Road is Bitcoin. So anyone out there that thinks that Bitcoin today is going at $29,000 because of the blockchain, no, you are mistaken. Blockchain is outstanding technology if you can figure out what the hell to do with it other than laundering money. Now, I'm poking the bear right there. All right. There are other uses these days for blockchain. Back then, no. Matter of fact, still a nice use case for many of these tokens is laundering money, illegal activity. Well, Ross is really what causes Bitcoin to start becoming popular, to have a use case so that people use it. If you want to know why crypto is so popular today, look at none other than Ross Ulbricht. Yes, Satoshi Nakamoto created the token. What gave it value was Silk Road and Ross Ulbricht. Okay, that's a fact. Now, Ross Ulbricht had this idea, and his idea, he wanted to create a system that went against or could show us, he called it a simulation on LinkedIn, because his LinkedIn profile talked a bit. It didn't mention Silk Road by name, but it talked about it. He wanted to create, quote, an economic simulation that could prove or show what a market could be or an economy could be without violence or without governments interfering with it. So that's what Silk Road to him was. And he meant that. He meant that people have, if you've been watching my show, I've mentioned before that there are three motivations for cybercrime. Those motivations are status, cash, and ideology. Status. Some of these criminal communities these days are millions of members large. If you can do something within that community that no one else can do, build and deploy ransomware, build and deploy bots, use stolen credit card details to defraud Amazon or Apple, provide drop services in an area that no one else has got, run money mules that are trustworthy. If you can do this kind of stuff that no one else can do, you gain the respect of every single person in that community, and that respect equates to profit. Cash is still king. Most crime is committed these days online because criminals are wanting to get paid. Ross is the third reason. Ideology. He believed he could change the world. How did he believe he could change it? By creating the largest drug trafficking market on the planet. At that point in time, it went through $1.2 billion worth of transactions. Okay, so that, needless to say, Ross gets caught. Now, here's the big secret. In the next show, I'm going to be talking about why law enforcement has a lot of difficulty arresting these criminals. And it's not rocket science. It's really not. It's simply that there are so many criminals out there, not enough law enforcement to do it. So they tend to target the higher ups. And back then, there was no one higher up than Ross Ulbricht. So what happens? And what happens is they arrest the guy. I want to go through just a second. And hey, this Ross Ulbricht bit may be a show in and of itself. We'll see when we get through talking about it. But I want to comment about how Ross was arrested or what identified the man. All right. So let me, I've got several different pages pulled up here. Let's see. Yes. So this is from CNN.com, article listed October 4th, 2013. The name of the article is, oddly enough, How the FBI Caught Ross Ulbricht, Alleged Creator of Criminal Marketplace Silk Road. And I'm just going to read a section of this because this really goes into what I talk about sometimes about cyber criminals are not really sophisticated. And a lot of the times they screw up very early on, and it's not horribly sophisticated as long as you've got very diligent investigators. It's not horribly complicated or sophisticated to track many of these individuals down and put them in prison for a long time. So in this article, the section is called Catching the Dread Pirate Roberts. So Ross Ulbricht ran Silk Road. He built Silk Road, and he went by the screen name Dread Pirate Roberts, the character from The Princess Bride. And if you've not read the book, read the damn book. If you've not seen the movie, that's a travesty because it's also an outstanding film. Now, that being said, let's read some of this. So in the section of the indictment outlining how the link between Ulbricht and Dread Pirate Roberts was established, Tarbell, investigator, detailed how an FBI expert, codenamed Agent One, had located an early online mention of Silk Road dating to January 27th, 2011, when a user under the screen name Altoid made a post on a forum for users of magic mushrooms. The post says, I came across this website called Silk Road. Altoid writes, I'm thinking of buying off of it. Let me know what you think. 2 days later, someone using the handles Altoid again made a similar post on a forum called Bitcoin Talk, recommending Silk Road and providing the link. Quote, has anyone seen Silk Road yet? It's kind of an anonymous Amazon.com. I don't think they have heroin on there, but they are selling other stuff, end quote. Now, for those who surf the web as much as I do, you know, you're visiting Reddit, you're visiting some of these forums. It is, what happens is an individual starts up maybe a YouTube channel, maybe a Twitter account, maybe a forum someplace or a website or whatever, and he'll go to a larger forum and he'll pretend to be someone else and he will post about it. He'll say, hey guys, have you guys seen this new site? Have you guys read this new Twitter account or watched these new YouTube videos? Have you done this? Well, that actually has a term because that is extremely common online. And that term is called astroturfing. And that's the process of someone coming in and plugging their channel on other people's channels and sites in order to get members to come over there. And that's exactly what Altoid was doing. Well, it turns out, the article continues. Investigators were given a major break when 8 months later, Altoid made another posting on Bitcoin Talk, stating that he was looking for, quote, an IT pro in the Bitcoin community, end quote, that he wanted to hire for a venture-backed Bitcoin startup company. The posting referred those interested in the position to Ross Ulbricht at gmail.com. This is a classic case of what I refer to as FIS, fucking idiot syndrome. I have talked about this before. It's a thing. I'm going to try to get it into some medical journal at some point. But many people, many criminals suffer from it. As a matter of fact, I have been a sufferer of FIS multiple times in my past. It's obvious that Ross Ulbricht was suffering from it at that point in time in his career. Fucking idiot syndrome, FIS. Now, that's how they ended up identifying this guy. From there, they start monitoring him, doing all this other stuff. At one point, they intercepted a boatload of fake IDs that he had sent in, and they interviewed him at that point. So this is all Ross Ulbricht. Now, that's how he was caught. Now, I have made mention, and as I was talking to this guy on Twitter, it occurred to me that a lot of the problem when you're talking about Ross Ulbricht and the sentencing. So Ross Ulbricht, they got him at the library in San Francisco. They got his laptop. On his laptop, he had a boatload of evidence. He had Tor chats on there, which are anonymous chats. He had those logs on there. He had files identifying different users, because it turns out that his mods and admins, he had made them send him copies of their driver's license, selfies, all these other things, in order to that he knew who they were, so that he could enact violence upon them if they ever chose to betray him. And that's a fact. All right. So Ross was caught at the public library, San Francisco. They confiscated somewhere around $24 million worth of Bitcoin from him at that point in time. By all accounts, he hadn't really spent any of it. He had taken one vacation. He was living in a room for let with 3 roommates, who later on he does try to have murdered. So, or at least he thinks he's going to have them murdered. And we'll get into that in just a second. So this was Ross. They catch the guy, throw him in prison, and ultimately they give him 2 life sentences plus 40 years. Okay, 2 life sentences plus 40 years for operating silkroad.com, the largest criminal enterprise on the planet at that point in time, close to 1 million members, $1.2 billion in traffic, and the largest drug market on the planet. Dealt in everything. Matter of fact, and we'll get into that in a second. So this is Ross Ulbricht. Now, what I have said in interviews, on my channel, in blog postings, on Twitter, everything else, and I have changed my mind. I bounce back and forth. And here's the thing I want people to understand. Differences of opinion are great, but be informed on your opinion, okay? Have some knowledge. Don't just pull it out of your ass and make it so. Know what you're talking about. Be informed, be educated. Have your own opinion. Don't just listen to someone in a channel, even this guy that's talking to you today. Don't just willy-nilly listen to me. Form your own opinions. Be able to know where you're getting that. Don't be a sheeple. Don't follow the crowd. Be yourself. Form your own opinions. Go from there. I don't care if you disagree with me. That's fine. I don't care. It's okay to disagree. That's what this country is. We're allowed to do that. A lot of people don't really understand that anymore. But we are okay in disagreeing with people on anything. So by all means, if you don't agree with what I'm saying, that's okay. I'm okay with that. Okay. Still listen to me, because I need the subscribers, and I appreciate you guys taking the time to do that. So what happens is Ross is given 2 life sentences plus 20. I have mentioned in interviews, blogs, my channel, everything else, that he tried to have people murdered, okay? And that has gotten a lot of static from some people. And not only have I said it and it's gotten static, but other people have said it as well. And you have this whole group of people, oh, that's wrong. It's wrong. He never did that. He was never convicted of that. And I think the issue has been a lot of people don't understand this idea of the way the federal justice system works in some cases, okay? So I'm going to take a moment to explain that, because it's kind of important. And the first place that I really saw this stuff really hitting home was when I was serving federal time. I was sentenced to 7.5 years in federal prison. I ended up serving a little over 6, okay? While I was there, a lot of federal inmates have been convicted of conspiracy. And there's this thing called ghost dope. So to be convicted of conspiracy in a criminal case, in a federal case, the only thing that a prosecutor has to have in order to convict someone is the testimony of 2 different individuals saying you did it. They don't need any tangible evidence. They don't need actual drugs that they can show a jury or a judge or anything else. They only need the testimony of 2 individuals saying this guy did it. I'll give you an example of the way that works. So they go and arrest somebody that, some low-level guy that has, he's been maybe selling meth on the street corner or crack on the street corner or whatever the hell he's doing. They arrest this guy, or maybe he's just a user, because this is very common too. So they arrest this guy who's addicted. And because of his addiction, he's forced sometimes to sell some drugs on the street as well. So they arrest him. The prosecutor or the agent interviewing him ask him, hey, where'd you get the drugs? And he says, oh, you know, man, I'd prefer not to say. Well, how about this? You're going to do you a good 8 to 10 years in prison. Where'd you get the drugs? And he's like, well, look, man, I bought them off Brett Johnson. Okay, so you brought them off Brett Johnson. Brett Johnson where? And he gives the address. Well, okay, so how much did you buy off Brett Johnson? Well, you know, man, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I guess I bought maybe, I don't know. I guess I bought maybe an ounce a week. So you bought an ounce a week. How many weeks did you buy it? What do you mean? I mean, how many weeks did you buy an ounce a week off Brett Johnson? Man, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I guess I bought it every week off of him. Okay, every week off of him for how long? Man, I don't know. I guess I bought an ounce a week off of Brett for I don't know, 2 or 3 years. So you bought an ounce a week off Brett Johnson for 3 years. Yeah, I guess that's about right, man. I bought an ounce a week from him for about 3 years. Well, that ounce a week totals 36 ounces that Brett Johnson is then charged for if they can get somebody else to say basically the same shit, which what they do is they go and pick up another guy and they're interviewing. And they say, hey, who'd you buy from? And he says, oh, you know, man, I bought from all kinds of different people. Well, who'd you buy from? You ever buy from Brett Johnson? Well, yeah, man, I bought from Brett Johnson. Well, how much did you buy from Brett Johnson? I don't know, man. I mean, I bought. You know, what do you want me to say? I bought. I want you to say how much you bought. How much did you buy? I don't know, man. Maybe I bought 2 ounces a week. All right. How long did you buy those 2 ounces? I don't know, dude. Shit, I've been doing drugs for 4 years. I've known Brett for years. All right. So you bought 2 ounces a week for 4 years. That's another 96 ounces. So 96, 36. Oh, that's some time for Mr. Brett. We'll get his ass on conspiracy. So he gets an indictment for conspiracy because he's got 2 people that have said that he sold that to them for 3 to 4 years. All of that, that's what's called ghost dope. You've got no evidence of those drugs whatsoever, but you get the conviction for conspiracy on that amount of drugs where they don't exist anymore. So is it sometimes possible that you've got a guy that maybe is lying a little bit about who he's buying it from or how much he's buying it from, or just doesn't remember and he just gives out these numbers? Yeah, it's there. It happens. That's the problem with conspiracy charges. And it's a thing. It's a thing. So there's this other thing too called relevant conduct. And that is where some of this Ross Ulbricht sentencing comes in. Relevant conduct. It's something that you don't have to be convicted of in order for it to be used against you at sentencing. Think about that for a second. So where I first saw it was a guy by the name of Bobby Bellavia, Bigabit. He was one of these Italian gangsters associated, and he had been given life in prison for gambling charges. The reason he had been given life in prison is because on relevant conduct, 3 bodies were attached to that. So he was given life in prison for that. Now, ultimately, he appeals, wins his appeal, and gets it reduced down to, I think, 20, 25 years. And I did some time with this man. He was a very, very kind individual, very nice guy. He was. I mean, he was a very quiet guy. He was good to get along with, and he was a good cellmate. We were at Big Spring Prison together, and it was not an open compound, but a converted Air Force compound where everyone slept in barracks. You didn't have individual cells, and I was in the same unit as this gentleman, and we got along great. But he was initially sentenced to life in prison for gambling charges, and then on appeal, got that reduced. For those who may not know who he is, and probably most people don't, if you've seen the movie Goodfellas, he was part of that ring. Okay. So, relevant conduct. Ross Ulbricht. Ross Ulbricht had charges for some of this murder for hire stuff. He was never convicted of them. In fact, those charges were later dropped. But was that figured in on sentencing for Ross Ulbricht? Yeah, it mattered. It mattered. So I want to take a moment to talk about how Ross Ulbricht was going to have people murdered. And that's important. Wired Magazine, April 1st, 2015. The name of the article, Silk Road Boss's first murder for hire was his mentor's idea. All right. And again, I mentioned when they arrested Ross Ulbricht, they got his laptop. On his laptop, he had all this damn incriminating evidence. He had chat logs. He had files of his team, files of people that he was going to have murdered, everything else. He had all this information that then investigators had just a field day using against him and helping to locate other people and giving them multitudes of years on top of that. Again, another example of what I like to call FIS, fucking idiot syndrome. It takes an idiot to do that kind of stuff. If you're involved in online crime, you're actually going to keep documents of people with their IDs, with selfies, with everything else. What, you think you're not going to get, you think you've not gotten law enforcement's attention? You're running the biggest criminal market on the planet at that point, really the only one on the planet. You've done $1.2 billion worth of business. You think that law enforcement's not looking at you, yet you're still going to keep all this evidence on your laptop? You, sir, FIS all day, every day. So they got his laptop, and some of the evidence, some of the evidence included a 21 instant message chat log, which Ulbricht had saved, that was conducted over the anonymous IM, or instant message service, Tor chat, which was on the dark web. Now, I mean, they wouldn't have had it if Ross Ulbricht hadn't saved it. They wouldn't have had it, but he saved it. So the chat log is between Dread Pirate Roberts. He carries out a conversation with one of his staffers, Inigo, who was a supposed drug dealing He carries out one of the conversations, and this conversation involves the staffer Inigo, a supposed drug dealing associate named Knob, who wasn't a drug dealing associate at all. He was indeed an undercover DEA agent named Carl Force, and a figure named Simone, or Simon, Cimon, who also went by the screen name Variety Jones, whom Ross Ulbricht has described in his journals as his mentor and advisor. Evidently, this Simon guy, or Simone, or Variety Jones, or whatever you want to call them, this is the guy who also gave Ross Ulbricht the idea to get the screen name of Dread Pirate Roberts. The conversation revolves around $350,000 worth of Bitcoin that had been stolen from Silk Road. Dread Pirate Roberts, aka Ross Ulbricht, believed, and Inigo, his staffer, believed that the Bitcoin had been taken by another Silk Road staffer by the name of Curtis Clark Green, when in fact those Bitcoins had been stolen by a rogue Secret Service agent who just happened to have access to Green's account. That Secret Service agent, his name was Sean Bridges. And the problem with this, and it's a huge issue, the problem with this case is that a couple of cops were dirty, very dirty. All right. And that matters, because you get that shit in front of a jury talking about dirty cops, it kind of taints the entire case. And we'll come back to that. Okay. So Sean Bridges had stolen the $350,000 worth of Bitcoin using Green's account. Ross Ulbricht thinks it's actually Green that does it. So the chat logs, we're going to talk about those because it's important. It really is. This conversation is important. And at one point in the chat, at one point, the chain of conversations that leads to the attempted murder of Green begins when Inigo alerts Dread Pirate Roberts, Ross Ulbricht, to the Silk Road massive Bitcoin theft. Roberts responds that he's, quote, sick to his stomach. Quote, he says, "This will be the first time I've had to call on my muscle. It fucking sucks." Later that same day, Roberts chats with Knob, the DEA agent, who he believes to be a high-volume drug dealer who can help provide that muscle to find Green and recover the Bitcoin. Roberts, this is, again, FIS syndrome. Roberts kept a copy of all his employees' actual IDs to prevent the sort of betrayal he believed Green had committed. So he knows Green's name and Green's address. In the conversation with Knob, it's clear initially. So the way this conversation works out is really interesting, right? So while he's talking to Knob, that initial conversation, Roberts has no intention of killing Green. And the conversation goes like this: Knob, do you want to beat up, shot, or just pay to visit? Now, this is a DEA agent that asks Ross Ulbricht this. Ulbricht responds, I'd like him beat up, then forced to send the Bitcoins he stole, like sit him down at his computer and make him do it. Beat him up only if he doesn't comply, I guess. I mean, I'm not sure how these things usually go. So this is the head of Silk Road, Ross Ulbricht, that's talking to a DEA agent that believes he doesn't know he's a DEA agent. He thinks he's this drug dealer that can get shit done. And he's saying, hell, I don't know how this shit goes. I mean, I want my money back. I want the funds back that he's stolen. Maybe just beat the shit out of him, make him sit down at the computer, force him to send the Bitcoins back, send him that message. Later on, though, Ross Ulbricht talks to his advisor, Simone, aka Variety Jones. He talks to his advisor, and the question of murder then starts to come up as Roberts explains how Green might have stolen the funds. Simon, or Simone, I'm going to call him Simone, Simon. Simon interrupts. Enough about the theft. Tell me about the organ donor. A few minutes later, Simon brings up the idea of killing more explicitly. As a side note, at what point in time do we decide we've had enough of someone's shit and terminate them? Like, does impersonating a vendor to rip off a mid-level drug lord using our reputation and our system, does that cross the line? Does it follows up by stealing from our vendors and clients and breeding fear and distrust? Does that come close in your opinion? So Simon's getting to the point of, okay, where do we draw the line? Where do we make it that this warrants someone being murdered? Simon's all about this. And Ross responds, terminate? You mean execute? As the conversation continues, Roberts seems to become more and more convinced that murder is a real option. Simon seems to imply that simply beating up Green, the guy they think stole $350K in Bitcoin, might lead him to talk to the police. Here's the conversation. And I'm sorry to do this to you guys, but this is, I need to walk through this so that people understand that this stuff is not just being said. This is what actually happened. Okay. So Roberts, if this was the Wild West, and it kind of is, you'd get hung just for stealing a horse. Simon responds, yeah, pretty much. At what point in time is that the response? We're playing with big money, with serious people, and that is the world we live in. Simon again, I sure as fuck don't want Knob to try it, fuck it up, and then have our laundry aired. Roberts, well, unfortunately, there isn't much in between. Simon, well, I know a guy, and he knows a guy who knows a guy that gets things done. Roberts responds to that. In a perfect world, we'd get the money back plus our expenses and maybe beat him up or something. But that's not realistic. Simon responds, nope. And it ain't the money. Fuck, it's your fault. No one else's. Someday I'll tell you a long story from a guy who explained to me why situations like this are always your own fault. Roberts responds, so yeah, it's a good question I've been thinking about the last 24 hours. Simon responds, but he came at us from inside, put many people at risk and facing a serious felony if he's definitely the guy that would say what little he knows for a break with the feds. So they're not only are they thinking that the guy is stolen from them, but they're realizing that, hey, this is the kind of guy that if he's ever picked up, he's going to sing like a bird. I'm going to tell you guys the truth of the matter. Everybody is the kind of guy that will sing like a bird. In prison, you've got two different types of people. You've got the people who have talked, and you've got the people who have wished they would have talked. Now, Ross and Simon, they evidently don't get that. But everyone is the type of guy that will sing like a bird. Now, there are the old school guys. Make no mistake about that. They're the old school guys. I served time with Bobby Bellavia, served time with some of the mafia guys, served time with the pilot for that Johnny Depp movie where he's transporting all the drugs back and forth. Served time with that guy. Outstanding guy, would never rat, snitch, whatever you want to call it, on anyone. But times have changed these days. Today, you look at a man and you say, hey, we're going to give you 20 years in prison. And they mean that shit. Or you can tell us what you know, and we'll give you 3 years and cut you loose. That is about all the motivation you need oftentimes, because they do not make people or inmates the way they used to make them. Also, the threat of that many years, that really is a motivator. The only people who really tend not to talk, well, you got those people that are involved with the cartels. Because you talk about those people, they're not only going to kill you while you serve time in prison, they're going to kill your wife, your family, your children, your dog, your pet birds outside, whatever. So the motivation to not talk has to be a hell of a lot higher than the motivation to talk. And oftentimes that's not the case. You tell a man you're going to give him 20, 25 years in prison because that's what they do. They don't give out pennies and nickels anymore. They give out dimes and quarters. 50-cent pieces, 50 years in prison. You tell somebody that, they're going to talk, especially if you're dealing with some of these cyber criminals who's never really done anything before. They're going to talk. That's a fact. All right. So Simon's like, well, this guy may talk. We need to take his ass out. Well, you know what? Everybody talks. And I have no doubt when they arrested you, as they did, I had no doubt that you sang like a bird too. All right. Ross Ulbricht, did he sing like a bird? Well, hell, he didn't have to. His laptop had tons of evidence in it. This is an idiot who requires the driver's licenses and selfies and addresses of his entire staff and keeps them on his laptop for any law enforcement officer to find. This is an idiot who keeps chat logs of every single conversation that he had. That's why we know he planned on murdering people. This is this guy. Talk about fucking idiot syndrome. That's it. I got to tell you, yes, I was one too, but I never did shit like that. I never kept evidence like that on my laptop or any place. I didn't keep people's identities. I didn't even ask for people's identities. I didn't want to know in case I ever got caught, which I did because I was a fucking idiot. Brett, how did you get caught? Well, the way I got caught was I chose to break the law. Nobody wants to hear that, but that's how you get caught. If you don't choose to break the law, chances are you ain't going to get caught. Moving right along. So Simon comes back about 30 minutes later. He tells Ulbricht, I'd have been really disappointed if you would have said anything else than that. That was the response I expected. We're playing for keeps these days with big players, dangerous players. We've got to be able to send a message. And if you had chosen anything different, I would have really questioned our relationship. And then he tells Ross that I'll take care of it. Now, here's the thing, and I've said this in previous episodes. The thing is, just because you say something, don't make it so. Just because you tell somebody you are something doesn't mean that you are. Simon had told Ulbricht that he was, he could get this murder done, that he could do all these different things. It turns out that he was a big talker, and that's about it. Was he trafficking drugs and shit? Sure he was. Sure he was. Was he able to do a murder for hire? We don't know, because he damn sure didn't follow through with it. Instead, Ulbricht goes back to Knob, the DEA agent. Ha! And he pays Knob $80,000 to kill his staffer. $80,000. Do they kill the staffer? No, they don't. They go to this green guy and they say, hey, Ross Ulbricht wants you murdered. Well, what do you think is going to happen then? Green going to tell the FBI anything and everything he knows? You're damn right he is. So they fake Green's murder, send Ross Ulbricht pictures. So Ross thinks he has had this guy murdered. That's the first instance of violence in Silk Road at that point in time. And I'm going to tell you guys, these days, when I ran, when I ran Shadow Crew, we were a non-violent group. The first instance of violence that we had was from Dmitry Golubov, and in the last days of Shadow Crew. So Dmitry Golubov is the man that's responsible for modern credit card theft as we know it. He's a Ukrainian. He started a website called Carter Planet, which is it is the genesis of all modern credit card theft today. Okay. Dmitry from the Ukraine, today he's on parliament in the Ukraine. Vladimir Putin's probably going to kill him at some point. But back then, as Shadow Crew was really coming to an end, Dmitry comes in and he posts pictures of someone that he had kidnapped that owed him money. And he posts pictures of the guy being kidnapped, the guy being tortured, and he basically sends a message, hey, never steal from me again. That's the first time that we ever saw violence on those forums. Okay. And it really gets your attention. Your mind, you try to tell yourself that it's fake, that's not real, that didn't happen. He's staging that. No, that shit wasn't staged. The dude did that. Now here Ross Ulbricht is, and I need you guys to understand this. This is a website that has traffic of $1.2 billion. Thousands. It had almost 1 million members. Almost 1 million members. Drug trafficking was its bread and butter. The people who traffic drugs are people who they don't mind violence. They know that, to quote Monty Python, violence is inherent in the system. So violence was there. And now we see Ross Ulbricht that's willing to commit violence to protect his empire. Okay, he thinks this guy's stolen from him. That's an issue. But what really is the problem is he thinks this guy may rat him out. You've got to take care of that, because if you're facing, again, this motivation thing, if you're facing doing prison time of 20, 40, life in prison, what would you do to not do that time? That is one hell of a motivator. It's one hell of a motivator. But the motivations on this get even more, because later on, Ross also contracts to have 5 more people murdered. And that is one hell of a clusterfuck of a story. So you got this guy, this scammer, and hats off to the dude. He went by the screen name of Red and White. That's what I'm going to refer to him as. He was arrested later on. Simon was arrested later on. And you want to know why? Because Ross Ulbricht had all this information on his friggin' laptop. It was not difficult to round these guys up at that point in time. FIS syndrome. So the other 5 murders, what happens is guy sets up a vendor's account on Silk Road, scams hundreds of users. Let's segue for a second, talk about how a lot of users are sufferers of this idiot syndrome. It's a thing. People need to seek medical attention, or at least find people who do not suffer from FIS. Anyway, what happens is people who purchase drugs online, illegal drugs, oftentimes they're not very skilled to begin with. They're certainly not cyber criminals. They don't commit credit card theft a lot of the time. They don't do all this shit that I used to do, where you know how to hide your identity and why you should be hiding your identity, use drop addresses and everything else. They don't do that. They typically use their real address, their real name, and they'll order their marijuana, they'll order their ecstasy, they'll order their benzos or maybe heroin, cocaine, meth, what have you. They'll order that shit and have it sent to their address. You see this all the time on Reddit, the subreddits on Reddit that talk about darknet sites and people ordering drugs. You'll see somebody that will order their ounce and a half of coke or pot or what have you, and you'll see them post, "Hey man, the U.S. Postal Service, they seized it, man. Do I have anything to worry about?" Yes, you do have something to worry about. The first and foremost is that you're a fucking idiot. Why would you send that stuff to your real house in your real name? And you think when it gets seized, you have to ask, is there an issue? Yes, there is an issue. People like you, my friend, everybody else trying to break out of prison, you're trying to break into prison. Ha! So a lot of people do that. So this guy sets up an account on Silk Road, defrauds a whole boatload of people who obviously give him their real addresses. This guy ends up with thousands of different real names and addresses, including some of the staff of Silk Road. He defrauds these people for six figures, like $600,000. Comes back in under another screen name, same guy under another screen name, does the exact same thing again to another tune of six figures, about $600,000. So he's already sitting on over $1 million from just defrauding users, which ought to tell you, if one guy can do that on a marketplace, how big that marketplace was, how much traffic that marketplace had. And again, violence is inherent in that system. If you're ripping somebody off. So what happens is you get somebody to give you a bag of, say, OxyContin. So, sometimes you can buy those pills used to sell. I don't know what they sell for now. They used to sell for $1 a milligram. So an 80 milligram tablet would cost $80 is what you could resell that for. And you could resell it all day, every day for that price. So you could buy it in quantity. You could buy it for much cheaper than that. I mean, without a prescription. So you could buy it, across the Mexican border, have it, run it back across at $15, $18, $20 a tablet sometimes. And that was a high price. But if you didn't have any other connections, that's what you paid. Okay. But you could resell it immediately at $80 a tablet. So it was very fast, very easy profit. If you're getting those things fronted to you and you rip the supplier off, what recourse does he have? Criminals have no legal recourse. The only recourse they have is violence. So violence is there. So anyway, this guy, Red and White, he defrauds under one username, comes back under another username called Lucy Drop, defrauds, does the exact same scam again, defrauds another boatload of customers and staff on Silk Road, gets all their information, all the real names, addresses, and everything else, goes to Ross Ulbricht, threatens to divulge all of that. I'm going to release all of this information publicly so law enforcement can round all these people up. What do you think that'll do? Well, the problem is not that you're releasing the real names of customers. The problem is what it does to your criminal empire, your website, because trust matters. The users of that site have to be able to trust that that site is secure and that site, their information is not going to be divulged. And this user, this one guy is threatening to release it all unless you pay me X amount of dollars. Ulbricht doesn't. Well, lo and behold, the same guy that's trying to extort Ulbricht by blackmailing him comes back under another screen name, tells Ross Ulbricht that he's a hitman, and contracts with Ulbricht to kill himself. Only Ulbricht thinks it's, a different person. Again, it's that whole idea of just because you say something, don't make it so. So Ulbricht pays this guy six figures. This guy ends up profiting like $2.1 million from all these little scams that he's doing. And he's actually trafficking some drugs as well at the same time. So he does all this, about $2 million, and Ulbricht ultimately contracts with this scammer to kill an additional 5 people, including his 3 roommates. Remember Ross Ulbricht, he was living in a room for let. He had 3 roommates. At one point, he contracts to have these people murdered. So does that matter? Yeah, that matters. So on appeal, I've read the appeals, everything else. Ross gets sentenced to 2 life sentences plus 40 years in prison. 2 life sentences plus 40 years in prison. On appeal, he beats one of the life sentences. He's still got a life sentence plus 40. If you read the indictment, the initial indictment, it does reference those murders for hire that he attempted. He was never, he was charged, but the charges were dropped after the final appeal was shut down. Okay, so what happens is you got 2 dirty cops. There was an appeal that wanted to talk about how dirty the cops were, if they tainted the case, if there was any exculpatory evidence that might be there or actions that those cops might have committed. The appeal and the judges found that there were not. That did not have. That's the basis for that. You've got to be able to show that. Ross Ulbricht was never able to show that. At the same time, yes, as I read the report from the judges, the judges did indicate that they thought that sentence was an extremely long sentence. But here's the problem with that. While the judge did take into account those potential murders never happened. Ross thought they did. He was ready to kill 6 people. And let me tell you, that's no different. It is absolutely no different than those old stories you used to see in the news and everything, that some spouse, some husband would be reading through Soldier of Fortune magazine. He'd get through the back of the classifieds and he'd see hitman for hire, mercenary for hire, and he'd say, I hate my wife. I want my wife dead. And he'd contact who he thought was a hitman, who was really a law enforcement officer. He'd contact this person, I want my wife dead. And they'd meet in a park someplace, and the cop would be, you want your wife dead? I want my wife dead. How much money have you got? Well, I ain't got no money right now. I got the insurance on her. I'm willing to pay the insurance money. How much is insurance? I'll give you $20,000 out of the insurance. I like that. You got anything right now? Well, I don't really have much money right now. I may be able to scrape up $500. And the cop who he thinks is a hitman's like, I'll take that too. So as soon as he pays that, they arrest the guy, charge him for conspiracy to commit murder, and give the guy a boatload of time, even though his wife was never killed. That shit is against the law, deservedly so. So even though Ulbricht no one was physically murdered, here's the other side of that coin. 6 people died because of Silk Road overdoses. And don't come at me with that stuff saying, well, they chose to take those drugs. Yes, you're right. They chose to take them, but they bought them off of Ross Ulbricht's website. All right, that's where they bought them. And it's absolutely no different than someone going up to a corner someplace, buying heroin off a trap star, and then all of a sudden, when the indictments come down, they give the guy who's running that trap star 40 years in prison. It's no different than that. Well, that guy didn't sell it there either. Ross Ulbricht didn't deliver the drugs. No, his little underlings did. Well, it's no different with Ross. It's just online is the only thing that happened. So 6 people, at least 6, ended up dying as a direct result of Silk Road. Ulbricht is ultimately responsible for that. It's a choice he made. Okay. That being said, I feel very sorry for Ulbricht, his mom, his friends that he no doubt lied to about what he was doing, the victims. This whole situation, it's a whole lot of time. If you read where they shot down his appeal, what they say is yes, it was an extraordinary amount of time, but according to the sentencing guidelines, you see, federal sentencing has these guidelines. You go by dollar amount and the amount of criminal activity and criminal history and everything else, and it gives you the range of months, because you're not sentenced in years. It gives you the range of months that you're going to be sentenced to, and that's one of the big jokes in the county jail. When you're getting sentenced, you see these people who don't really pay attention to things. Some guy goes out to get sentenced and he comes back and he's happy and he screams to everybody, hey man, I did all right. I only got 240 months. Then he goes back to his cell and he counts up on his fingers and toes how many years 240 months is, and he don't come out of his cell that night. That's pretty common. So they gave Ross life. It was within the guidelines. It was an extraordinarily high sentence, but within the guidelines. The judge did take into consideration Ross's willingness to commit violence to make sure that his empire stayed alive and active and was trustworthy to other users there. She took, I don't know if it was a he or she, but the judge took that into consideration as well. But what the ruling says is that even without taking that into consideration, the sentence was still within the guidelines of the crime, simply because of the amount of drugs that went through the site, the amount of money that was laundered, the traffic that went through the site. All right, so it's still an appropriate sentence. My ultimate view, because I've been asked what I think about this. My ultimate view is that Ross Ulbricht chose his actions. We all choose our actions. We all choose our actions. We can live a life victimizing others, as I have in the past, or we can choose to try to benefit society. And Ross Ulbricht had this idea, and he believed that he had this idea that he could change the world, that he could create a system that was free of slavery or violence. But the system that he created, violence was inherent in it. There was, I don't know about slavery, but there was certainly extortion and making people do things that they didn't want to do. The actions of drug trafficking feeds into human trafficking, violence, everything else as well. So the system they set up to try to meet his beliefs, the only thing I can say is he had a lot of cognitive dissonance going on. Truly. Now, did he change the world? Well, I mean, he certainly is the reason that crypto is what it is today. He's the genesis of all that. I know there's a lot of people out there these days that, the crypto and the Bitcoin, it's not illegal. There's not a whole lot of illegal activity. There's a whole shitload of illegal activity. That's where it gets its start. I'm not talking about the guy that pays 10,000 of them for a pizza. Bitcoin's real use case came in Silk Road and laundering money, buying illegal goods and services. And it grew from there. Other darknet sites started to do the same thing. Finally, it becomes more mainstream. You got institutional investors, things like that. Today in the United States, 12% of the US population has some form of crypto holdings. Ross is the start of that. He gets credit for that. But he also chose those criminal actions. And there's nothing beneficial about that. I'm sorry. I mean, I've seen those arguments on Reddit, on Twitter. I've sat in on some of those debates where people try to justify that, saying, it's just people choosing to buy drugs, or they're nonviolent. Well, you're supporting groups who are violent. You're buying these things from the cartels, from mafia, from organized crime elements. You're helping human trafficking when you do it. You're helping to facilitate that. It helps to finance that kind of stuff. So yes, there are victims. And yes, Ross Ulbricht engaged in that. Do I think that he deserves life in prison? I would hope at some point that the man gets out of prison. Okay. I would like to see him get out and do some good. I would. Now, that doesn't mean that he has to be released in order to do some good. I would think and hope that he's able to, that he's helping people inside, because at some point, I've said this before, when you're doing time, one of two things are going to happen. You're either going to accept responsibility for your actions, that your choices put you there. I was very fortunate that I was able to do that. Or you're just going to become angry and try to blame your crimes on everybody else. Okay. I have seen in interviews and responses coming out of many people who support Ross Ulbricht that second, of anger, of blaming his choices on every single person else. I've never spoken to Ross Ulbricht personally. I don't know what his mindset is, but I would hope that the man has accepted responsibility for his actions and is using his time of incarceration to become a better person. I would also hope that in the future that he gets out and is able to do good, make amends, help people. But I'd also hope that while he's incarcerated, he's doing the exact same damn thing. That is today's show. I had planned on doing synthetic fraud. That'll be the next show. I talked about Ross Ulbricht a bit too much. End of the day, what do we say? We say stay safe, stay secure, stay vigilant. More than that, This is the Brett Johnson Show. I say at the close of every show, just do the right damn thing. Think about that. Think about that, how easy that is and how difficult that is sometimes. Just do the right damn thing. You know, he could have set up any number of other types of systems, sites that dealt with legal things and tried to grow it out from there. But he chose crime. And at the end of the day, he chose to get caught and go to prison. I'm Brett Johnson. Until next time.